Hello and welcome to Grouchy Geeks episode 61. My name's Scott, and joining me is a man whose opinion I always value, but I can honestly say I've never been so keen to hear what his thoughts are. It's Steve.
Good evening. We should start by saying we had something completely different planned for this episode. We knew exactly what we were going to talk about. We've done some prep, and we've completely thrown it out to the window. We've got no news to report apart from one thing, and that's the only thing we're going to talk about this entire episode.
This week has been a whole roller coaster because, first of all, we weren't going to do an episode, and then we'd decided to do an episode, decided what we were going to do,
yep.
And then Steve had something come up, so we said we're not going to record, and then that changed, and said that we were going to record. And then a couple of nights ago, I was looking at my phone, and then Steve had sent me a couple of WhatsApps, and I only saw the second one highlighted on my phone, and it just said, "So anything we were planning is irrelevant now." I didn't really understand that, and then I saw his previous WhatsApp message, which I think is probably the most surprising WhatsApp I've ever seen.
Yeah. Yes.
So, what is it we're talking about today, Steve?
So, I'm on Patreon, and I support a number of creators. One of them is Michael Straczynski, creator of Babylon 5 and many other things. And as you probably know, if you've ever listened to this before in your life, we are both enormous fans of the show.
Mm-hmm.
Last week, he posted something saying, "Watch the skies on Monday. Something is coming, really big news, really exciting." And we all thought, oh, right, what's that? What's going on? And then Monday just gone, Monday the 27th of September, articles started appearing around sort of 4:00 UK time, saying that, and I'm quoting, "A new version of the Emmy-winning space opera TV series Babylon 5 is in the works." So I'll give you the facts, and then we'll talk about what we know. So the CW has put the show into development, and it's being described as a from-the-ground-up reboot from original series creator JMS. So JMS is writing the reboot. He's currently writing the pilot, and it is revolving around John Sheridan, who in the original was played by Bruce Boxleitner, and he goes to Babylon 5. Now, he's halfway through or three-quarters of the way through writing the pilot, and what people have said is, well, what does that mean? And he's gone on to say it's a reimagining. It's not a reboot in the same sense of we're just doing the same story over again. And he said, if you think more like Battlestar Galactica, that's probably closer to what this would be. He said you can't tell the same story with the same characters and just do it all over again. So that's what he's said. He has also reached out to all of the surviving cast from the original and has asked them if they would like to be involved in some capacity. So, whether they come back as older characters, definitely not the same characters, given that they're keeping the same sort of, John Sheridan and so on. So that's really good. He also said that Babylon 5 broke the mold in lots of different ways, with CGI at the time, with storytelling, having a definitive arc for a show for a 5-year with a defined beginning, middle, and end, which hadn't really existed before until he invented it, and lots of other things. So he said he wants to do firsts again with this show. He wants to do something different, and it can't just be the same old as what we had before. So beyond that, and the fact that it's on CW, we don't really know anything else, like how many seasons, if it's been greenlit for a full season, any of that sort of stuff. It's just too early days, so we're going to speculate.
It's just mind-blowing, right? I've deliberately... So I started looking up news online, and the first thing that I looked at, and I've not been on Twitter for a number of years now, and the first thing that I saw was a tweet, and it was basically so toxic that it made me just deliberately not want to go out and looking for news on this. But I did continue a little bit. And as early as 2018, there was people asking JMS about a Babylon 5 reboot. And he was absolutely definitive in saying it will never, ever happen. You know, Warner Brothers have got no interest in doing it. You might as well forget it's ever going to happen. And I'll be honest, the news was inconceivable to me. I honestly never, ever expected that it could happen. And I would have been less surprised if it was announced that JMS was doing a My Little Pony reboot.
That'd be interesting. Yeah.
It would have been awesome, right?
Because, so one of the reasons I think this has come around is that they're desperate for IP, they're desperate for stuff to develop into new shows. That we know that the streaming services and so many others are developing so much content. There's like a constant churn. The other reason is that last year, for the first time ever, Babylon 5 was put onto a streaming platform. Mm-hmm. I think it was HBO Max. I'm not sure because we don't have that here in the UK. But whatever it was, it reintroduced the show to a new generation, to several new generations who didn't watch it or weren't alive in the 90s to watch it. And the popularity on there made a bunch of people go, hey, this is really good. And I've got a horrible feeling that some of the network people who made a decision weren't alive at the time as well. And they've gone, hey, this is really good. Don't we have the rights for this? And then it's just sort of trickled in that they've thought, well, we still have the rights. We could still do something new with this. I don't know. It's just kind of built up over the last 12 months, 14 months. And then suddenly here we are talking about a reimagining.
It's just mind blowing. And one of the well-known things about Babylon 5 is that JMS really was the powerhouse behind it. Like there was other producers like Doug Netter that were kind of responsible for it from a businessy point of view. But JMS did something ludicrous. He wrote every episode of seasons 2, 3, and 4 back to back. So he wrote 66 episodes in a row. That's never been done before. And he was on set, as far as I could tell, every single day. You know, he just poured his heart and soul into it. And that's, I actually looked it up just before we recorded. The guy's, you know, the guy is still a powerhouse, obviously, but he's 67 now.
Yeah.
And I just would think, well, first of all, he can't put the same amount of effort that you put into the original. It just seems inconceivable to me. But it's amazing that he wants to bring it back, given, you know, the amount of effort that he put into making a success the time before.
I think it nearly killed him last time. The cast were worried about him. They were bringing him food and like vitamins. He aged massively whilst he was doing it, lost a ton of weight because he was always there writing or producing or doing other things. And as you say, he wrote a hideous number, something like 91 out of the 110 or whatever it is. But so things have moved on. TV's moved on. He's not been sat in a dark room ignoring anything. He's not going to come out and just try and write the same kind of show. And he said he's not going to repeat it himself. And other science fiction shows like The Expanse, the people behind it and the creators, you know, James S.A. Corey, Ty Frank and Dan Abraham have all said they were influenced by Babylon 5 and, you know, they took things from it and put it into the books, and they've done that, you know, into the TV show. And he's watched all these shows. He's a fan of these shows and he's aware of them. So he must have been looking at these and going, right, that's really good. If I ever did it, in the back of his mind in Dreamland, I could do this, or I could do that. The technology's moved on massively, so the special effects will be amazing. In terms of visual effects for the Narns and then Centauri and all the other things, they were never bad. You know, they were convincing, but even that will be up another level. So all the things that he was restricted by, it's like if you think about James Cameron, we want to do stuff with the films, like we can't do that. So you had to invent the technology to do it. Whereas now JMS has come in 30 years on and a lot of the stuff has been done for him. But equally, he introduced the storytelling with a start, a middle and an end. Now it's been running for decades. So he doesn't have to set up a bunch of things. which is really good. The fans will just kind of, all right, I understand what this is now. I get it. And they go into it. So he doesn't have to have the same kind of setup. I've got a couple of concerns beyond the fact that they're rebooting it.
Go for it.
So the first one is that it's on the CW network, which tends to skew to a slightly younger audience. The kind of shows that are on there are things like Riverdale and, you know, the DC shows, Arrow and so on. I think Supernatural was also on the CW that ran for 15 years. I think it's just finished its 15th year and it's now done. And that is slightly more mature. So I'll give them credit for that. But equally, the other concern I have is that seasons are full seasons. They're still like 20 odd plus.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And I don't think that works anymore. I know saying that Babylon 5, yes, was 22 episodes a season and 5 seasons, but I don't think it works today. So I wonder how he's going to approach that. And if it is going to be, if it gets green lit, we don't know, if it's going to be a full 22 a season again.
That never even occurred to me. I just assumed it was going to be like 8 to 10 episodes a season or something like that. But
Expanse level, like 13 max or something.
Yeah.
You know? I don't know. I just don't know. So the network is a concern, and how many episodes a season is a concern. 13, 10, something like that. That would be great. Half season they call it, I guess, over there. But streaming is more powerful, more popular, I would say, than some of the older kind of American networks that are still going. Amount of content. So they said that it's John Sheridan. He comes to Babylon 5, so he is going to be a younger man. My theory is he's a young officer, a lieutenant, a second lieutenant, or something, who's still middle of the pack, who's hot-headed because we know he was. He hasn't become this great leader because he's not there yet. So this is him in the much earlier days where maybe he meets a reporter who is a girlfriend, or maybe he's just got divorced from his first wife, who was a soldier that we never meet. And, you know, you can kind of start to weave things that were referred to in the past, but we're going back several decades. And I then wonder if the older officers who are actually running the ship, running the station, senior ambassadors are familiar faces that we know with different names who could influence him to become this great leader and this great man. But this is him many decades earlier, probably in his 20s, rather than we meet him when he was, I'd say, late 30s. So, but it's all speculation, as you know, at this point.
It's interesting that you say that the CW skews younger, because there are some very, very hard-hitting episodes. I mean, I'm thinking in the original, so I'm thinking of things like, are we still connected? Oh, sorry. We still there?
You just stayed there for a sec. Yeah.
I'm thinking of not episodes that are about the whole, you know, huge overarching story arc, but things like, you'll know the episodes probably from the names, so things like Believers, which is, I think, a season 1 episode, which was about a particular species that were on board the station that had a child who could very, very easily be cured, but the parents' religion didn't allow them to do that.
Yes.
And it's it plays out like a normal episode of Star Trek, but the ending is not a typical Star Trek ending. And things like Confessions and Lamentations, which I think is towards the end of season 3, it covers very tough topics in a way that I don't feel like is common in TV even today. So skewing it younger, it'll be interesting to see how they deal with things like that. But ultimately, it all comes down to having faith in JMS. And the guy has had an amazing career and has worked on things, everything from The Real Ghostbusters and Murder, She Wrote to after Babylon 5, he did The Changeling, the movie. The guy has done an amazing. He's had an absolutely incredible career, and I'm presuming that he's not doing this because he needs the money. I presume that he's doing this because he finds it really interesting and he thinks he's got something interesting to say. So, out of all of the concerns, the fact that it's JMS doing it is the thing that engages me and makes me interested.
Yeah, I think you're right. He pushed the show. He pushed the envelope. He said he's going to do that again with the story and other things. So I would expect that from him. The other thing I thought about was that he's worked on other shows in the past that wasn't his material, and he's kind of struggled with it because sometimes he doesn't have as much control as he would like. This time it's his material. And yes, he nearly killed himself last time. I think this time, and this is, again, I'm just speculating, I think it will be a writer's room. Because I don't think he's physically capable of doing what he did last time without it really killing him. Equally, diverse cast, diverse voices requires, and TV's different, it requires a diverse writing room. And he'd obviously, be the showrunner. He obviously sets the bar and, gets them to do things. But other people did work on Babylon 5, remember? People like Neil Gaiman wrote an episode. Harlan Ellison was like a fact checker and a sanity checker on the show, and I've watched some interviews with him talking about that. So I think there's going to be some of that bringing in. Sadly, Harlan's no longer with us. We can't do that, but I have a feeling he's going to bring in people who he trusts to sanity check stuff to make sure that he's doing things right. And I think it's going to be a writer's room where, just like Joss Whedon was the showrunner, but he had a core of 8 or 10 writers whose names pop up, and you'd go, "Oh, that'd be a great episode. So and so is really good at this or that. I remember this kind of stuff." But he can't do it like he did it before. It just can't be. And also, how can I get in that writer's room and be on the? I'll pay them. You don't have to pay me. That's that. Who do you have to murder to get into that writer's room? Oh, imagine that.
It'd be really interesting. So something that I've seen that JMS has posted was saying that he's learned his plan is to. So he definitely in the original Babylon 5 he pushed what television was capable of at the time to the very limits. And like you were saying, there's lots of things that we're used to nowadays. The overarching. Well, he had a show arc, but we're now used to season arcs. But I'm not sure I can name another show that's got a show arc in quite the same way that Babylon 5 did.
The only one I can think of is Supernatural, which was supposed to end at season 5, and then they went, "Yeah, we're not going to do that anymore." And Eric Kripke left, and they carried on the show without him. They changed the end of that last season. It went on for another 10 years.
Wow,
10 years. Anyway, but yeah, that's the one I can think of. The rest of them made up as they went along, and the result is you end up with shit like Lost. Yeah,
but he really pushed the limits of things. And he was saying that he's learned every writing job that he's had since then. He's learned something and added new things to his toolkit. And now what he wants to do is bring those new tools to bear on the show. And his intention again is to push what television is capable of nowadays to its very limits. And I can't even. I'm not bright enough to even conceive of what can possibly be going on in his head that makes him. What limits is he going to sort of push beyond? It's really exciting.
I've been thinking about this as well, because I spend a lot of time thinking about, characters and stories and, writing books. There's a lot of stuff you can do on TV and film that you just can't do in books, not to the same degree. Obviously, there's the visual aspect, but there's techniques you can do on TV that you just can't do on a book. So what you can do is, so you think about the Battlestar Galactica episode. Was it 22 that was in season 1 or something like that? Where every 22 minutes, the Cylons find them, they cycle, they attack, and we have to try and work out the mystery of what's going on within this thing. And the show's not repeating, but there is something that's repetitive all the way through, this motif. You think about Star Trek episodes where they get caught in a time loop and they can do things again, and they have to kind of break out of it. And so I started thinking about that, and you can jump through time, which they did do in Babylon 5 in the original, but not in the way that we've seen it in TV since. He would have an episode set mostly in the past, or characters in the present traveling to the past and seeing things and then coming back. You can do a lot more. Well, they've done a lot more things since then. So you could have like 100 years ago for 5 minutes, and then 10 years ago, 1 month ago, 1 week ago, 1 day ago, and then the story, is 20 minutes in when it gets to the present. And that's kind of a motif that people have done with playing with time, visual effects, changing people, changing characters, deep fake stuff. All of that kind of thing didn't exist, that technology. There's stuff you could do there for interesting stories. Like, I can't remember in season 1, the guy who has he can pretend to look like someone else. What's the kind of, it was a weird kind of body cloaking thing. Oh,
I might be getting the wrong show. Is it a chameleon suit or something like that? I know what you mean. Yeah.
You know what I mean? But that was and the technology back then was really clunky, and they had to kind of like try and do the best they could with the visual technology. There's things you can do with that. And the idea of back in June, you had face dancers, but you can do that now with technology that you couldn't do before. So there's storytelling techniques there. There's just so much. There's the technical side, and then there's the story side, and then there's all of the science fiction and fantasy novels and TV shows that have been out in the last 30 years. Just look at The Expanse and all the cool things they can do with that. And that's a great model of, it's based on books, but they've changed it. They've taken it in their own direction. I was going to do a thing about this another time, but have you read any of The Expanse books?
No, I haven't.
But you watched the show now, haven't you?
I've watched some of the episodes.
So in the first book, one of the characters is only mentioned in passing, but we don't meet her until the second book. Whereas in the TV show, she's there from the beginning because they needed the political angle at the start. So Avasarala is right in it at the start.
Yeah.
And it's different in the books. And there's other characters that are not prominent in the books that when they've gone to the TV show, they've gone, we need a character that can do this. We haven't really got that. And they brought someone in. So I'm going back in my head now and thinking about Babylon 5 and thinking, where was there a gap that we never saw? Like, we had the chief medical officer, we had the chief of security, we had a couple of other people. We had episodes where it was view from the ground up, a guy who's just fixing stuff on the station sees what other events are going on around him. But we never saw, like, who runs the engines, who's repairing it. Not necessarily a chief engineer, because that's kind of too close to Star Trek, but we never had that kind of side. There's lots of things they could bring in that we never saw, and it's a new way to tell new stories on the station.
So we've mentioned, not just in this episode, but in many episodes before, how brilliant we think JMS is. And we've mentioned in the episode what a powerhouse he was on the original Babylon 5, writing so many episodes and pushing himself to the limit to do what he did with Babylon 5. But ultimately, television is a collaborative medium. And one of the things for me personally, and I'm sure for you as well, that made Babylon 5 what it was these incredible performances from people like Andreas Katsoulis as Jakar, Peter Jurassic as Londo, and that pairing was, it feels like it's impossible to recreate. That was lightning in a bottle. You don't, the only way that sort of thing can happen is kind of, the casting was brilliant, but just that magic you can't manufacture. So how do you feel, but obviously, there are many brilliant actors out there, and we've talked about how much we loved, for example, Tatiana Maslany in Orphan Black, and what an incredible job she did. So, we obviously know that there are brilliant actors out there who can do an incredible job. But the original Babylon 5, although much of its success can be laid at the feet of JMS, there was such, once in a generation performances in that show. Yeah. From many different people, like I say, Peter Jurassic, Andreas Katsoulas. So those are the two that really stand out to me. But the whole cast was just brilliant and just fit together fantastically. And that's one of the things that makes me question its success. However brilliant JMS does a job of the writer's room and the scripts and being executive producer, it's going to require some incredible casting for it to compete against the original Babylon 5.
Yeah, because as we know now, but we didn't know at the time, why Michael O'Hare left.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed to get someone in, and they got Bruce Boxleitner in because they said he knows his stuff, he's good at his job, he'll also treat the material with respect, and they got him in, and he didn't just do technobabble, he committed to the character. They're going to have to get people into the same level of that to say, look, you may not like it, you may not be behind it, you may not have watched the original, it's probably better if they haven't. I want you to come in and I want you to give me something that I can believe. I want you to read the material and give me a performance. You want the person to feel like the character, to inhabit the skin. So we know that John Sheridan is in it. My hope is that they won't just have a lot of characters with the same names. Mm-hmm. If there is a non-ambassador, I don't want it to be Jakar. You can't have someone else play it. They're having someone else as Sheridan, but you can't have someone else. And I think out of respect, I don't think he would to Andreas Katsoulas. You could have amazing non-characters who are rock hard warriors and who have suffered and have been through the mill because of what they've gone through. The story could start during the middle of a non-occupation still by the Centauri. We know that from history, I'm sure it was the Centauri that first made contact with the humans, and they claimed to be rulers of the galaxy, and it turns out they're a bunch of lies and it wasn't true.
Yeah.
And all that kind of nonsense. Plus we had the Dilgar War where Earth won, but they were not very high on the totem pole species. There's things like that we might get into. There's lots of areas to mine early in the history, but I hope they're not constantly doing, like you said, the Han Solo thing of, I can do the Kessel Run in 14, and then the little tick sheet. I don't want them to do that. I want them to do other stories. I want to find out about something horrible happened in the Dilgar War that we didn't know. All this kind of stuff that you can dip into that we never found out. So here's something else I thought of. We've come a lot more used to subtitles in films, especially foreign language films, but equally, if you watch a TV program and an Asian speaker comes on, or someone who's speaking Japanese. So I've been watching Man in the High Castle, and a lot of the cast are Japanese. So when they come up, they speak Japanese, and we get English subtitles just for when they're speaking if they switch back to English. I have no idea what any of the Pak Marat ever said, and no one else does, ever. Now we can give them a voice. Now we can find out what they're saying. Now we can actually find who they are about lots of the other races as species that we never could before, because it wasn't a thing. It wasn't doable. It wasn't a technique that was used in TV. But I want to know about the Pak Marat. They're disgusting and weird and eat carrion, but we also know they sing beautifully and they have religious services. But that's it. What else? The League of Online Worlds. We don't know much about any of them, really, apart from one or two. And all the other ones that had masks, and it had like voice coders almost. And then it would never come out in English. Someone else would have to kind of translate what they were saying. So I just, it's going to happen now. Whether it gets greenlit for full series or not, it's not up to me. It's not up to anybody. It's up to people of the powers that be. I can't stop it. But I just started thinking about, okay, it's going to happen. So what would I like to see? How could it be different? How could you tell different stories within this universe? And that's where my brain's been going. What have you thought about what you'd like to see then, now that we know it's definitely happening?
So I've thought about things, but I know that I'm just not on. I'm very happy to say that anything that happens will be a surprise to me. The thing that I'm really curious about is how, and like you said right at the very beginning, a really good analogy is Battlestar Galactica, because there's the 1978 Battlestar Galactica, and the reimagining of it by Ronald D. Moore it clearly is heavily based on the original, but it's totally 100% its own show. And it feels like that's what's going to happen, and I can't conceive of what that can possibly mean in reality. But I'm just really interested to see what they do with it, and how much it's based on what happens in the original Babylon 5, because that is such an incredible overarching story that's done so brilliantly, that I can't imagine them doing the show and us not be heavily based on the younger species relationship to the Vorlons and the Shadows, and how the different races interact with each other, and the different the Minbari and their system of 3 castes, and the Centauri and the Narn. It just seems like such, the original seems like such a powerful story to me that it's very, very difficult for me to, I think, move beyond that and think what he could possibly have in mind.
You can't tell the Vorlon Shadow War story again. You can't do that. If they introduce certain fixed points, like racial things, like you said, like the Minbari, that's fine, because that doesn't change too much. But there's other things that we were touched on, like the telepath war. Are there going to be telepaths in the show? And if so, how is he going to just do that differently? Because technology and things was different there again. Finding a way to show telepathy and telepaths and telekinetics will be interesting. There was something from the original I thought of as well that they couldn't do back then, again, because technology wasn't possible. But originally, Ambassador Delenn was male, and during Chrysalis, she then becomes Delenn, who we saw.
Yeah, and in the pilot episode, The Gathering, the character is still played by, I can't believe I've forgotten her name.
Mia Furlan.
Mia Furlan, yeah. But in the pilot episode, the character is at least not obviously male, but is much more androgynous than Delenn throughout season 1, and has an electronically altered voice to make it much lower. And then I think they just realised that it was going to be unfeasible for a whole season to do that, and so they sort of abandoned that. But yeah, that's something that they could much more easily revisit now. And actually, there's almost a precedent for JMS doing interesting things in that kind of an arena, because he was the showrunner and the creator of Sense8, which was a Netflix show.
Yep.
And it's been a while since I've seen it, but there they definitely play around with concepts of gender and relationships and yes, things like that. So we know that we know that he originally desired to do that, but for technical reasons they couldn't. And we know much more recently he's got, it's clearly something that is clearly an aspect of storytelling that he's interested in continuing to explore.
The other thing is that the best science fiction fantasy is all about holding up a mirror to the current world and what's to come, being prescient of things that are going to happen in the future, but also telling stories about today. And they said that when Babylon 5 came out. So he's going to have to be telling stories, like you said, about race, sexuality, gender, which he had in the show, right down to things, purple and green, the fact that flags and territory and with the Drazi and all that kind of stuff. But where are we with that in today's world? And he's done it through all of his work, whether it's Rising Stars or something else. He's always talking about the present time. And he doesn't need to do a story about a pandemic and how it affects people and how it makes people rage and hurt people. We've had that. We've already done that. So I don't see him repeating that. He won't go to the well on a story that he's already done so well before. There's no point. He wants to do something different every time. But I mean, it's been 30 years or since it came out nearly. He's obviously watched the world change in those 30 years, but I'd have to almost go back and start cataloging things in my mind or write a huge list of what's happened the last 20 years that I'd want to talk about in a way that we can say something about the present that's still interesting. That would take me years just to work that out in my brain before I could then say, right, okay, now I've got to go and do something, which is another reason I think if you go into a room with 10 people and you say, pitch me your ideas, and you put them up on a board and then you just whittle them down to the best 10 and then you build them and that's your arc for the year based upon these fixed points for these characters and what's going to happen. I mean, there's all these things like there's this phrase, what's it called now? Meet cute, which I hate.
Yeah.
But if there's a Delenn character, when is Delenn going to meet Sheridan? And if there's a young Narn ambassador or a young Centauri ambassador, it boggles the mind. Are they going to do Centauri? Are we going to have races that we never saw the first time around that are totally different? Or is he going to just dust the dust off the ones that we're familiar with? Is it going to be that same trilogy that formed the Inner Council of, Earth, Centauri, and the Minbari, and then, of course, the Narns and the Vorlons? Part of me wishes there's no Vorlons and no shadows, and that the mystery of the things, or what is that thing on the planet, we don't really know. They're creeping around the edges, something older that we don't understand. Because then the Minbari and everybody else discovers this race for the first time alongside the humans, because that changes the dynamic. Whereas before, she always knew more than everybody else. She was ahead of everybody else and the audience. But if they're all finding out at the same time as us, there's no more of that sort of, right, I'm going to tell you what's been going on because I've known about this for the last 100 years or stuff. It's a massive challenge. And I joked about being in the writer's room, but to be honest, I don't think this is one I'd want to take on.
Yeah.
To be one voice in the crowd, a chorus of many. Yeah. But to try and tell this story now in today's world, in today's TV landscape, that's a hell of a big ask.
Yeah. He must have a really strong idea of what it is he wants to do. Otherwise, why do it?
Someone else would, I guess. It's that thing of if he doesn't do it, someone else will. And you don't want someone else playing with your toys without you, because they own the rights, but equally they've asked him to do it. So it's that thing of he knows it better than anybody else. There's the nostalgia factor. There's the fact that he created it. I hope they don't do what they did with a lot of TV and films where they say the creator is the executive producer and they sit in the corner of the room. And if the writer's room don't understand something, they ask the guy or girl and say, what's this? And they go, yeah, blah, blah. Okay, right. And then they carry on telling their story. I mean, he's not. He's executive producing it and he's writing it. So it's different. But this kind of a show needs to have a unified vision. It needs to have one person. And as we said, it's collaborative. It has to be. TV is more so than anything else. Books are very kind of singular, despite editorial interference and same with TV and film. There has to be a singular vision for this show. And knowing him, he'll go in the back of his mind, even if he hasn't told them, he's planned out the arc at the start, the middle, and the end. And just as he had trapdoors for the characters in the first way round, I have a feeling this way, given how problematic TV is, he'll have trapdoors for the show as well. So if they say to him, right, it's only going to be 3 seasons now, mate, he'll just cut corners and cut chunks out so you can still tell a satisfying story. Like he did when they said, you're not getting a season 5. And then he had to ramp up season 4 to be one of the best seasons on TV ever.
And then they said, oh, actually, we will give you a season 5. Surprise!
Last minute. Hence why Sleeping as Light is still amazing, but they shot it at the end of season 4.
Yeah.
So part of me wants to go back and do a rewatch, and part of me is thinking, I shouldn't. I should. Some of it's faded from my memory, and I want to go in and be surprised by whatever this new version is.
Funnily enough, I'm partway through a rewatch at the moment. I've been buying it on Amazon Prime, and I've just finished season 3, and I haven't bought season 4 yet. But I've been buying it sort of a season at a time, so I am in the middle of a rewatch.
How are you finding it now? Then, when's the last time you saw it? Actually, when's the last time you saw it?
That's a really good question. It's been a while because I had them all. I had them all. The last time I owned them was on like VHS.
I've got them on DVD. I've got the 5 full box sets.
Yeah, so I don't have them on DVD.
Wow.
So I probably got them via more dodgy means, but they're probably terrible quality. So it's been a while. It may be at least 10 years, I would say. But yeah, it's absolutely brilliant to watch them again, and it really. So much of it sticks in your mind and just doesn't go anywhere. There's some real scenes from it that really stick in my mind that I know, even not having seen it for a long time, made such an impression on me that I just know verbatim before they come up, and are just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I'm excited, but I'm concerned. People say, yes, but the original is always going to be there. Yes, it is. But if everybody's talking about a thing that you love, you're going to check out the thing. And if it disappoints you, it's just like, it's going to be tough. But so he's writing the pilot now, which end of September. Even if it got greenlit, I don't think we'll see the first episode before this time next year.
Mm-hmm.
And even then, maybe not until 2023, I guess. It depends upon scheduling. It depends upon the speed of production. It depends upon if it goes ahead with him. It depends on how many episodes. Depends on, when is pilot season in America? I don't even know.
I don't even know that they bother with that sort of thing nowadays.
For networks, they must, though, surely. They must still have the basic American networks. I mean, because we don't have that to that same degree here now. We have shows that appear on a couple of platforms, and like a paid service we have in the UK called Sky and a couple of others. But apart from that, things just appear on channels. We don't have the same sort of core channels. I don't know. The long season bothers me now. He writes very long. That'll have to change. You won't get any 5-minute speeches anymore, like we used to have from Delenn and that kind of stuff. 1,000 years ago, when she starts telling you stuff, that's all going to change. There's lots of things that we didn't see last time. So we found out a lot about the core races. But as I said, there's the other ones that we didn't know anything about beyond they look a bit weird and they don't speak English, so you can't understand them. But there's things you could dig into the history more of the Centauri and the Narn, and you can dig into Earth history, but it's kind of, what's the point unless it's interacting with the present and when we made first contact. I mean, you could do a Star Trek First Contact story where it jumps back and the whole episode is all about the first time someone came to Earth and met an alien and it turned out to be a Centauri instead of a Vulcan, or whatever it might be. There's just things they could mine, things they could explore, introducing stuff that we took for granted in the first show, whether it's new technology or new species or telepaths. How does Earth suddenly develop telepathy? Why would it suddenly start coming out? What caused it? How would society cope with that? How would the station cope with that? That's something they didn't get into a lot. If you think about it, all of them wore badges, all of them had gloves, telepaths, but walking through a crowd, they're going to be picking up on sounds and noises and thoughts. surely that's going to be better policed. And then we know about the psychops, but it's just things like, someone reports a psychop for spying on them or for cheating at the gambling tables, or there's just areas that they can mine and spend time looking at that we didn't, so that you can tell different stories. And I think that's going to be key, finding different stories to tell so it's not familiar. Yeah.
And it's interesting that, so one of the things I remember saying to people about, not about Babylon 5, but about Star Trek The Next Generation, is that Star Trek The Next Generation, it's worth sticking with it because it gets really good by season 4, which is like 120 episodes in. And that's just not acceptable nowadays, right?
Nope.
But when I think about one of the things that makes Londo such a brilliant character is that in the first few episodes, you think, who's this clown with ridiculous hair that drinks too much and is super extrovert and, the life and soul of the party. And it takes you visiting with that character in that state for an extended period for the tragedy of that character and the pathos and what happens to him and how he influences the world around him to have that same resonance. Whereas today, it just feels like you couldn't have a character like Londo and not get cancelled in your pilot episode.
Telling layered characters, it can be done. Doing tragedy. If you think about Avasarala in The Expanse, there's tragedy built into her character in the show. It's not a spoiler to say that, her son was killed in an earlier conflict. And whenever she has conversations around the table with people who were previously enemies, there's always that uncomfortableness that's built in. And that's a testament to the actor. There again, he's going to go into these people and say, right, this is your character, here's the scenes, off you go. And if they get the part, then it's going to be right. Here's all this other stuff you've got to carry around in the back of your mind. Whereas normally actors say, they go in and they go, oh, well, I think my character may have started off like this, and then they became this, and that helped me tell. I suspect Jamie has got on some of them going like, no, read this book. This tells you who your character was. Now carry that around in the back of your mind when you do a performance. I mean, he's going to have to do something like that, or the actors are going to be brilliant and have really good direction to understand that if you're playing this bumbling fool, there's a very specific reason, and that your character isn't always going to be that. So if you cast someone who's got really good comedic timing, you're going to have to say, right, can you do this really serious scene? And they'll be like, well, yeah, why? It's a different character. Just read it anyway and see if they can do both halves. Because if they can't, if they're a comedic actor and they can't do a straight scene, then they're not the right fit, because all of the characters had major arcs. And that's something else you don't get into the same degree in television. One of the best transformations over TV is still Wesley from Buffy into Angel. And throughout the course of the Angel TV show, he starts off again as this bumbling, really nervous Englishman who trips over his own weapons, who's really kind of silly and just a joke. And by the end of Angel, he's this leader. He's wounded. He's suffered horrible tragedies. We know about his family. He's gone through hell and back. He's done all sorts of terrible things for the right reasons. It's going to be really difficult to do that, I think. That's going to be a challenge. Beyond, and that's going to come back. It's going to come back to the writing. It's going to come back to having the right actors and the right direction on set. You can have all the best special effects and techniques and camera work and everything else you want, but if the actors can't pull it off, I can't even think about casting because there's too many people out there. I wouldn't even like to. I want someone to come in that I don't know. Do you remember when Lost started back in the days when it was very, very good? And we knew nobody on the cast apart from Terry
Quinn.
Yeah, Terry O'Quinn, who we'd seen from X-Files and Millennium. Apart from that, everybody knew on the cast was pretty much brand new. And now, Evangeline Lilly's a household name from all the way through from the Marvel films, and so I want unknowns, or I want people that are not typical, because Mia Furlan was a Czech actor who came to America and she brought something different. So I'm hoping he'll cast quite a wide net. I'm nervous.
I can't ever think of a show that's come back that has got such big boots to fill.
Yeah.
Even Star Trek seems like a much smaller hill to climb than to try and, build upon or do something interesting and different in the Babylon 5 universe.
Well, as much as we love Star Trek and as much as the shows did build into season arcs, it was never integrated to the same degree as Babylon 5 is, because every character had an arc that would fit into the larger story. And you didn't get that. I mean, Picard now, in Star Trek Picard, we love some of the pathos and payoffs in that first season. Overall, I think the season was okay, but some of the best moments came for me when he met up with Riker and Troy and had these conversations. And there again, it was the weight of them, only because we've been watching these characters on TV for 30 years and all the stuff that's gone before that we knew about. Bringing that level in is going to be the challenge, and carrying it through on a TV show. And there again, if they cut it short, or they don't give him the space, or they want him to move faster, it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge. As I said, I wouldn't like to challenge it now, and he's doing it, in his mid-60s. He's going to have to surround himself with some really good people, like the best in the business at what they do. I don't know. Would you want to see any of the cast come back, like the original cast? I don't think Peter Jurassic will come back at all, is my feeling.
I don't think so. I did read that, he's keeping them all in the loop and there's options for them to come back. But I don't think I just don't think it's a good idea, because either they bring them back as the characters that they originally were, and I'm not sure
you won't do that.
I want to see that, or they just kind of give them, small parts and cameos, almost like as fan service, and that also doesn't seem like such a good idea. But ever since the remake of Battlestar Galactica came out or was announced, and I was like, they're making Starbuck a woman? That's what a silly idea. And ever since that moment, I've realised that I should never offer any opinion about a piece of casting.
I mean, you had Adama, as the Admiral, as the older guy, the old man, telling them stories and inspiring the younger generation. So if you have Bruce Boxleitner as a general, who's one of the inspirations on Sheridan and one of the people who influence him, that's fine. But I don't think you could have him always there. He almost needs to come in, do a few episodes, have an impact on the character, and then step out again. Something like that, where it's satisfying, but just having them in the background. I mean, this isn't like Ghostbusters Afterlife, the new film, where it's passing the torch. It's the next generation. It's Egon's grandkids. Have you even seen the new trailer for the new Afterlife one?
I've seen. I think I have.
So right at the very, it's a tiny spoiler, but it's a trailer. Right at the very end, the phone rings, and we can see an occult bookshop sign. And a big hairy hand picks up the phone and says, "We're closed," and it's Dan Aykroyd's voice. And and all these kind of pop culture things, like they say, "Oh, back in the 90s, it was like The Walking Dead," and they show all the ghosts on TV and how it was back then. This isn't that. This isn't 20 years ago, the Shadow War and blah blah blah, and Sheridan did this. It's like no, because you're Sheridan. So apart from him and maybe one or two others, I think they have to keep the names different. I think you can have slightly similar totems. You can have a Narn, you can have a Centauri, you can have a Minbari, but and telepaths because they're part of society. But I would keep the name check references to a minimum almost, because like you said, it becomes a tick sheet of you're waiting for so-and-so to turn up. There's so much to tell within this world, and they're using Babylon 5 as a central point, which is fine. It's the nexus because of that's why it exists in that particular place in space. It's a meeting point of all these races and all these kind of stories, which is fine. But I don't think you can tell, it's not the same story, and I don't think you can have the same people beyond one or two, because then it just becomes, it's like a game on tracks. You start to feel like you're just following down certain pathways, like on computer games.
I'm quite at one with the idea that, so obviously when it comes out, I'm going to watch it.
Yeah.
But I'm quite at one with the idea that my Babylon 5 was the one from the mid-90s, and it spoke to me and it meant a lot to me. But this Babylon 5 is going to be aimed at a different audience. And if they love it and I can't take to it because I've got so much baggage tied up in the original Babylon 5, then that's absolutely fine. But, I'm hoping that I love it. But I'm more than willing to hold on to the fact that the original is still there and I still love it. And it was so influential on me that this incarnation, just, I'm not going to be the target audience for it. And I think that's absolutely fine and the way things should be.
I just hope that the stories aren't dumbed down. I know it's on the CW, and I know, they can do good shows on there, and they have, and the audience is slightly younger. I mean, he's never talked down to viewers, and I hope they don't try and dumb down the stories for the audience, because young people are smart. They're way smarter than we were when we were teenagers. We knew nothing. The world has changed. The world has moved on. 13-year-olds now are so much more worldwide and knowledgeable than we ever were. So I hope they allow him to tell the kind of stories that he wants to tell, targeted at the younger audience. And I may not get some because it's not speaking to me about what kind of person do you want to be? Where are you going? What are you doing? I kind of know all these things. I'm 20 years on from probably the key audience, but I hope they don't dumb it down and they allow him to tell these stories. That's probably my biggest fear, that one, it gets cancelled too soon, and two is they're like, oh yeah, and it just gets stripped back to kind of sound bites. And I'm just like, that would upset me more than it not being for me.
But you have to, if they've got any sense, the guy behind the original Babylon 5 and the Changeling and Thor and this vast array of brilliant things.
Yeah.
If they don't trust him, then that's their problem, really.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to be keeping a close eye on his Patreon that I'm a member of, and see if I can find out. We think we kind of get information slightly earlier than everybody else, but we still get the information. So I'll be watching that like a hawk to see what's going on over the next year, I guess, as news starts to trickle out, like when the pilot's finished, and if there's news. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again in the future. But
maybe you'll be the first person to see a photo from on set.
If it's filmed in Vancouver, I think we have to move back there now, Scott, to go to Vancouver. Just be on sets all the time, lurking in the background, walking through. You'll recognise a bunch of stuff. Go, hey, I was there. I walked there. I've been there, like you did on
Caprica.
Yeah. So I'm nervous but excited, and I'm just a bit apprehensive. I guess we see what happens next year and in the coming months.
But such surprising news. Like, I genuinely, if you'd have asked me, I would have honestly said it's impossible. It will never ever happen. But it's and not only is it happening, which in itself is amazing, but JMS is behind it as well. It's just there
must have been such a big surge of popularity from the new versions that's been released. They're like redigitized. There must be the trigger that's made them go, there's something here.
But anyway, if you haven't watched the original, then you've got you can buy it on Amazon Prime.
Yep.
You can get the DVDs.
on the cheap. Get more cheap.
You can borrow my VHS tapes. And if you've never watched it, I honestly don't think there's anything that I would recommend more highly than that show. It's absolutely brilliant.
For a modest fee, we can come round and we'll just tell you the story. We'll just cite the scripts one at a time for 5 seasons. So strap yourself in.
So an interesting. I don't know whether I've ever told you this story. I must have told you this story.
Go on.
But something that was really interesting, something that was really another innovative thing about Babylon 5 was that this was in really the very, very early days of the internet. And he was one of the first writers. Now we've got Twitter and we hear what everybody's having for breakfast. But he was one of the first people to sort of like engage with an audience online and talk to them. And he posted on news groups, and there was a website called The Lurker's Guide to Babylon 5 that did like analysis of all the episodes and quoted what he was saying. So that was also something innovative about it, that not only was he the showrunner and he was writing 66 episodes in a row, he was also engaging on a daily basis with people online. And because this was the early days of the internet, I sent him an email and he replied to my email.
What did you ask him?
So it was basically, to be honest, I was just desperate to email him. And there was some, I can't even remember the show. There was some comedy show. I can't remember. I think it might have been Sybil.
Right.
Some American comedy show.
Yeah.
Where one of the characters showed up dressed up really, really strangely. She made a comment was, I've got a job as an extra on Babylon 5. And I wrote to him saying, this is really interesting because this, sci-fi at the time was a bit of a subculture. Yep. And this show was really, really popular. And I was saying, I just thought you'd find it interesting that they're referencing Babylon 5 within popular culture. And I just thought it was worth mentioning. And then he replied, given that he was probably in the middle of writing 66 episodes back to back, the fact that he replied at all was brilliant. But his reply was, message received, thanks.
Well, that's a good claim to fame. My only claim to fame with him is that I dedicated one of my novels to him for all of the stories, and I tweeted it at him and said, "Just this is coming out," and he said, I'm honoured, and I said, "The honour is mine."
What he should have said is when he said, I'm honoured, you should have replied, yes, you should be.
Block. Oh, no, come back.
So that was interesting. So something at the time that he said, when the original Babylon 5 was on, and I was sending him emails and
every day.
Here,
Joe. Oh, God.
And, he was engaging with the audience. One of the things that he was absolutely adamantly clear about was you cannot ever post anything that's a story suggestion or an idea or anything like that. Because if I've got something like that planned, and this happened as well, if I've got something like that planned and you post a similar idea, then I can't use that idea.
Yes.
I'm going to have to ditch it because it just makes everything legally too complicated because you could claim that you spurned the idea. Mm-hmm. And I saw a recent tweet of his just when I was looking at stuff this evening where he was like, no offense, but I've started all the people that are tweeting to me suggestions for stories, actors that could be in it.
Yeah.
As soon as I get a hint of anything like that, you're blocked. And he was very, very polite about it. He was like, I don't mean any offense, but I just have to do this. I've got no choice in the matter.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't blame him.
Yeah.
He's got to be careful. at this stage, especially because he's so early in the process. I wonder. We had, Doug Netter and Harlan Ellison and a bunch of other people. He's been looking after the Ellison estate. He's been doing an anthology, a new one that Ellison used to do with finding new voices in science fiction. So he's interacting with a lot of the people around there. So I wonder who he's going to bring in as the main DP and to work on the show with him and to be senior writers. And there's a lot of really good caliber writers out there in the business. People from The Expanse might come on, because that's only got the new season that's coming out. Well, we haven't got a date yet, but it's the last one. So there's a lot of great tech there they could use again, and people and expertise. But they shoot in Toronto and film up there all the time. So I don't know where they're going to film this yet still. But we're going to be talking about this for months and months. Every time a bit of news comes out, we're going to be talking about it.
I've got his tweet here. So he said, just a gentle note that I've had to start blocking folks, posting specific story ideas, suggestions for fictional companies, where the show should start, who should be in it, and how the short story should be structured. No animus, fair notice was given. And that was perfectly polite.
Yep.
But yeah, he just has to protect himself.
Yeah, I don't blame him. I don't blame him. People think he's joking, and he said, "I've given you a warning," and he blocks them. So you can't get any fairer than that. If it just keeps going, he'll just take himself off Twitter. Yeah, he'll just remove himself from there, so he can't get any of that in the future.
And that could be, it was a sign of the times that back when the original Babylon 5 came out, he was engaging with people online.
Yeah,
but it was a very, very small community. It was a small number of people that were online at all.
Yep.
So he was engaging with a very small number of people, and he was groundbreaking in that respect. But now that the internet has been opened up to billions of people, there's hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people on Twitter. Whether that's enough to drive him off the platform when he was a real trailblazer at doing that sort of thing the first time round, whether society has changed enough that this is actually going to drive him offline would be a real shame. But it would be interesting to see how that side of his process changes.
Yeah, he might just be that he can't do it, and then the only place you can ask him questions and stuff is conventions and all that kind of thing. And it's whether or not, he's always done them. He's always done conventions and panels and things. So I hope that he can do them again in the future. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting few years ahead now. We've got season 2 of Picard coming, and there's lots of other shows that I'm excited to see, but nothing has got me both equally excited and as nervous as a potential reboot, reimagining of Babylon 5. Part of me is tempted now to do a rewatch. All the DVDs, I could just dig them out and start going through.
Yeah, go for it. It's a real treat.
Right, I think we've kind of talked our own heads off about this. We've kind of gone around the houses now. I think that's all we can do until there's actually more news that I'm sure we'll report on whenever we get it. But have you seen the original Babylon 5? If not, go and do it. You're playing. Yeah,
if not, stop listening to us.
Yeah, stop listening to us. Put on pause and then come back. Yeah. Anyway, go and do it. Go and do it. Watch it, rent them, Amazon them, buy the DVDs from somewhere. Do that. And we'll be talking about them in the future. But in the meantime, it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him.
Good night.
Good night.